Good evening. Here's what's happening. We're interrupting our special broadcasting to bring you this special report, a UC news break on the People's Temple mass suicides in Guyana and the murder of Congressman Leo Ryan. I would mention to you now, tonight's movie will run in its entirety immediately following this special report. I also have to warn you as we begin this special report that what you're about to see almost defies description, and some of you may not want to watch it. As soon as these pictures from Jonestown cleared our newsroom, everybody, even a lot of hardened news people, reacted in horror and disbelief. The word on everybody's lips was shades of Auschwitz. These are the first pictures out of Guyana on the incredible orgy of death that took place in the People's Temple agricultural mission at Jonestown. This is picture number one. This picture was taken from up high. It shows what the mass suicide looks like when over 400 cultists who believed in everything that Jim Jones said took their own lives. Now, this picture was taken by an Associated Press photographer who was the first one back in there after the mass suicide murders. As you can see, bodies are strewn all over the place. This is inside one of the mission buildings. The bodies are laid out almost like everybody took the poison and then picked a place to be still somewhere until the poison took effect. They are in rows, as you can see, and very quiet, of course. The bodies are together in most of the places. This is a picture. One of the victims has an arm over another person's shoulder. Also in this picture, you will see to the right, in the bottom of this picture, there is a man standing. And if we'll pan to that, right there at the man's feet is a dog, the form of a dog. That dog was also fed the cyanide poison, and that dog then died along with the others. That's a Guyanese man with a gas mask on looking at the absolute devastation of human life that took place inside Jonestown. Now, we have more of the death scenes. The chair you're about to see, there on the right, in the lower right side of your picture, that's the back of a chair. That is the chair, the so-called throne chair, that was used by People's Temple leader Jim Jones. And over the chair on the stage, in the middle of the compound, is the sign, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Jones talked on the microphone that's laying there at the foot of the chair, and some of the sound equipment it looks like there. And so this is what the People's Temple grand plan in Guyana came to: mass suicide by cyanide and bullets. People pushing into position where they welcome their own destruction as a means to an end. Even when you know it's so, even when you see it as we're seeing it right now, it is still unbelievable.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. I've wanted to cover Jonestown for a long time. I just never really got around to doing it because I know people don't really want to hear about things that have happened in the past, especially this far in the past. But a lot of you who are younger don't know what Jonestown even is. And the expression that you've probably heard in your life of, don't drink the Kool-Aid is an expression which comes from Jonestown, which is nothing more than a CIA mockery MK Ultra operation that was put on as a test, because all of these things that happen that become mainstream stories, from the Oklahoma City bombing to September 11th to Waco, these events are controlled events. To the Manson family murders, the CIA has their hand in all of it. Remember, there's only so far they can take these experiments that they run inside of a test lab. Okay? Once they run these experiments on people and see how it works, they have to put it out in the open. And that's what Jonestown was. So for those of you who don't know, I'm going to play some video clips, which will break it down and simplify it even more so for you. But Jonestown is the story of a preacher, Jim Jones, who had the People's Temple, which was supposed to be a church, and of course they portray this guy as a Christian minister preaching about Jesus when he wasn't. Right? And how, all these brainwashed cult members followed his church. And he took them from San Francisco down to Guyana to start what was supposed to be a utopian society. Right? So he got all these people and they targeted black people. And they made everybody out there led to think that these people were willingly going down there, when in fact these people were being used and they were performing MK Ultra on them the entire time by using LSD and certain types of drugs on them, putting things in the water inside of the temple. Okay, and then once they got them down to Guyana, down to Jonestown itself, every day what these people would do is they would work and live in what was perceived as utopian society, while Jim Jones would then, they would proceed to put drugs in the food and everything they drank and ate, and used it as an experiment to see if these people could live in a utopian society under this dictatorship, where Jim Jones is supposed to be this dictator. Now remember, all of this stuff always comes how? How do they package this? Well, they package it as an attack on Christianity, right? Because when people think of Jonestown, they think of crazy Christian cults. That's what they think of. Oh, all these Christians. Oh, they're all crazy. Oh, they all followed this guy down there. And then he talked them into drinking Kool-Aid and killing himself. So at the end of this operation and this experiment, because Jones himself had become a very heavy drug user and couldn't even speak towards the end of this. Now, there's no proof if Jim Jones actually is dead or alive, or at that point, if he actually offed himself like we were led to believe, or if the CIA actually offed him because he became too much of a threat for them, because he was such a drug addict. It's like, you think about it, people who are in the mob and stuff like that, they don't let drug addicts be in the mob, because then they tend to become talkers and tend to become rats and things like that. They probably were a little bit worried about Jones and how he was living his life, that they probably did often, but there's always a chance that they just took him, repackaged him, and put him in an office somewhere in Israel, and he finished out his life doing that, or still could be alive for all we know. But again, they wanted you to believe that at the end of this experiment, Jones was yelling and screaming for all of his followers to drink the Kool-Aid, that it was time to go. There was time to leave here. We're all going to do it together. When in fact, these people were injected, and you'll see in the clips that I show you after I speak here, you'll see that they were injected with poison, that they were actually killed and forced with guns to their heads to take the injection. People were not willingly drinking the Kool-Aid as you're led to believe. Now, when the military went down there, they found that most of these bodies had injections in their lower back shoulder, I believe is the specific location, a spot where they couldn't reach and do it themselves. They had to be injected by somebody else. And again, the land, you'll find out that the land that Jonestown was, where they built the People's Temple, was actually CIA-owned land, where they were training operatives down there, mercenaries, under Project Shalom. Yes, Shalom. More mockery, right? Or just more truth in plain sight. So some people would say, well, why would they do all this? Why did they do it? Because this is the plan that they have for everyone. Remember, we're all under MK Ultra in a sense, right? They drug our food, they drug us with fluoride, they drug us with chemtrailing, and then we watch this program where they flash images and they're subliminally mind controlling all of us. Now, there are those of us who are strong enough to fight through it, to watch things in an alpha state, who don't let themselves drift into a dream world and get programmed by these television shows and these music videos. But the mass amount of people are under this, and they're being led through mind control into everything that we see going on now, right? They're being led into the satanic New World Order, and they don't even realize it because they're under mind control. Well, experiments like this are really the do-all, end-all of what they want and what they wanted. They want a society under the dictatorship, really, of the New World Order, or you could say an individual, because in their mind, Lucifer is the one that they're all going to be bowing down to and following, right? So they have everybody there thinking that this is a utopian society, and then there's a lot of things you'll hear in today's world, right? Everybody down in Jonestown, equal pay, equal rights, right? They create the illusion for us that there's not equal rights, that a woman isn't treated as fairly as a man, that a black person's not treated as fairly as a white person, or vice versa, or any of that stuff. This is all mind control tactics to bring this type of society into play, right? A society where everybody does have equal pay. Everyone is equal to each other. Equality, equality, equality. And I'm not saying that man isn't equal to one another, but these are trigger words that they use. And when these agendas get pushed across, everybody gets on board because they've already been programmed into thinking that this is what's best for them. In reality, what it leads to is a society which is run by Lucifer, and then all Lucifer's minions and puppets and these world leaders and stuff who tell us what's right and what's wrong. And then everybody else is a subservient slave to the system. Everyone's got equal pay and everybody's got this and that. But in reality, they're serving the Luciferian system. So the utopian society mindset and this entire mindset of what Jonestown was really, it was really all about. And unfortunately, the CIA targeted black people really. And in my belief, from studying this case, which I studied for a long time, that the real target, they were targeting black people. And they wanted to run this, the MK Ultra on them. And that's why a lot of the people who were in there and who were members of Jonestown happened to be black women. Right? And a lot of these people who ended up going down there, it's funny how nobody survived except a few of these people somehow got out of there, even though this place was surrounded with mercenaries, surrounded with them. And they got out of there to come back. Why did they get out of there to come back? They got out of there to come back and tell you a false story of what happened. Here are the victims. Here are the survivors. Parade them out, right? Just like we see with all these fake events on the news every week, right? Stuff going on in, these events that are occurring at schools. Right? Then they parade these people around because they're the victims. So we have to take advice from them and we have to hear their story. Their story is truth. There's no way that any of these people could be operatives. There's no way that any of them could be telling us a false story. Right? That's the naive say. But in fact, these people who survived down in Jonestown are nothing but operatives. One of these guys lost his wife and his child and somehow survived to come back. I mean, you hear the tales that some of these people tell. It's incredible. But I don't want to get off into a rant because I want you to focus in on the other half of the story. And this is important stuff. This is stuff you're not going to learn about in school. But there are a lot of casualties here. And I know a lot of people think that every event is a hoax, and they're entitled to think that. I fully believe from investigating this for a long time, not based on numbers and things like that, based on stuff that I've seen, things that I've read, CIA documents that have been released, the stuff you'll hear about in the upcoming video clips. That these people really were victims. They were nothing but sacrificial lambs. They were used as test dummies in an experiment. And when the experiment was over, they eliminated them. Simple as that. And it's important for people to know this because this is how our government treats us. This is how our government treats all of its citizens. But remember, we're told that us, the people, are in charge, and we're the ones who make the decisions, right? We elect people, right? Why do you think the celebrities always are pushing go vote? Because the only reason they pushed it is because they want you to think that your vote matters. They want you to think that you're in charge, not these people, right? It's the endless cycle of just complete and utter lies. And that's what the Matrix is a system of lies. But these are things they won't talk about in school. They won't talk about Jonestown in school, right? They won't talk about it. They swept it under the rug. The fact that they were trying to get, investigations going towards the CIA's involvement in it, and they just get buried. I wonder why. Poor nameless, faceless people who end up being sacrificial lambs for these Satanists, and just more stuff in plain sight that shows exactly what they have planned for us. And this is going on now. The stuff that went on in Jonestown is going on now because they are drugging us day in and day out. And they are preparing us for this type of quote unquote utopian society where, people believe that a utopian society would be like the answer to all of our prayers in a sense. But in reality, utopian society isn't possible based on the human instincts of people, right? People have egos. People are prideful. Eventually, people are going to want to get paid higher than the other person because they're going to think in their head that they do more work, yada, 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 right? And bartering and all this stuff. It sounds nice, but all you got to do is take a look at the Christian YouTube movement if you think that a utopian society or something like that would actually work in this world, because everybody's at each other's throats. Doesn't matter what religion you are, what your belief system is, if you're liberal and the other person's liberal, okay? People are eating each other in this society, and it's just going to continue to go on, and it's not going to be saved by a utopian society. But they're going to roll this stuff out, this equality and all of this stuff, and put a ribbon on it, and people are going to want all of this because they're going to be told there's no more boogeyman out there. There's no more guys hiding in caves and Al-Qaeda and all this stuff that they've created. That the world's going to be a better place, and it's going to be under the all-seeing eye of Lucifer. That is what their belief is. So I didn't mean to go off on a rant, but that's just my 10 cents on it. Not 2 cents, 10 cents. And for those of you who are interested in Jonestown and want to learn more about it, I have documentaries and stuff that I can upload if you're interested in it, if you've never heard of it. I know it's something that's dated, but I really just wanted to get this information out there for people who actually, grew up and were alive when this occurred and haven't really thought much about it because it doesn't get much airtime or anything. And whenever anybody talks about it again, the first thing they think of is what? Drinking the Kool-Aid. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, right? They turned it into this huge skit. SNL spoofs it. You see it in movies, horror movies. They have it almost based on the same story where, the guy makes them drink the Kool-Aid and everybody kills himself because he's got control over their minds. Well, yeah, he had control over their minds because he was using MK Ultra on them. That's why. And the same methods that were used in MK Ultra because he was a CIA operative. So if you like this stuff and you want to, hear more, it's something a little bit different, but It's something that I'm passionate about, and I wanted to get it out there. So take a look for yourself at these video clips, and let me know what you think in the comments below.
The methods that Jim Jones used in his cult, the People's Temple, are definitely classical mind control techniques. And according to a book by Michael Myers, which is called Was Jonestown a CIA Medical Experiment, his documentation leads him to conclude that actually Jonestown was run by the CIA. Prior to being Jonestown in the deep jungles of British Guiana, that site was actually under control of what was called the Shalom Project. This was a CIA program for training black mercenaries for warfare in Angola.
Congressman Ryan and the journalists arrived in Guyana on Tuesday, November 14th, 1978.
For some time, Ryan had been a thorn in the side of the CIA. He had recently pushed through congressional legislation.
Congressman Ryan and the journalists arrived in Guyana on Tuesday, November 14th, 1978.
For some time, Ryan had been a thorn in the side of the CIA. He had recently pushed through congressional legislation that curtailed the agency's covert foreign activities. As Ryan prepared for a first-hand look at Jonestown, he was joined by a State Department agent, Richard Dwyer. What he didn't know was that Dwyer was working undercover.
A man named Dwyer was the head of the CIA here. I mean, the CIA had a presence here. It was an unrevealed presence at the time.
The next day, 20 Temple members decided they wanted to leave. In a haze of drugs, Jones' world began to fall apart.
As the party reached the airport, a man with a knife tried to stab Ryan. The congressman described the attack.
Yeah, he said something about rob and choke and kill and or knife. I don't know. But what he said was he intended to kill him.
The party had now been joined by about 30 cult members who wanted to get away, and the enlarged party walked out towards the aircraft. Congressman Ryan, 2 reporters and an NBC cameraman were killed. Several other journalists and defectors were injured.
One man who was not executed at the airstrip was Richard Dwyer, the undercover CIA man from the American Embassy, seen here peeling off from Ryan's party seconds before the tractor arrives. Where Dwyer was in the next few hours is key to one of the mysteries that still lies at the heart of the Jonestown tragedy. Having dealt with Congressman Ryan, Jones now turned his insanity on the Temple's faithful. From his seat in the pavilion, Jones recorded the last desperate hour of the People's Temple. In front of him, more than 900 of his followers, who were surrounded by guards holding rifles and crossbows. For all but a few, there was no escape. Subsequent medical examinations revealed that many of the dead had been murdered, held down, and injected with cyanide. Jones himself was one of the last to die. A single gunshot to the head sometime around midnight. His killer has never been known. At 3:30 in the morning, when everyone was dead and several hours before anyone arrived, a radio message was sent from Jonestown using a secret CIA channel, reporting what it described as a mass suicide. This was the message that shaped our view of Jonestown for years to come, even though the best medical evidence suggests that most of those who died had been murdered. The question then becomes who sent that message. The only functioning radio in the area belonged to the local American intelligence officer, Richard Dwyer. Though he always denied going back to Jonestown that night, the last tape tells a very different story.
Take Dwyer on down to the east house. Get Dwyer out of here before something happens to him.
Though more than 900 Americans had died, Richard Dwyer and other U.S. Embassy officials would later receive medals and promotions. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit was subsequently filed by Congressman Ryan's daughter and the relatives of those who died. The suit described the deaths as a massacre and alleged that Jones was an agent or operative of the Central Intelligence Agency. It It was dismissed on a technicality and never tried. 20 years later, the CIA continues to deny any interest in the People's Temple. They claim that their own file on Jones is empty. But new evidence reveals startling connections between Jones and members of the U.S. intelligence community.
It began with a visit to Guyana by Congressman Leo Ryan, some of his staff, and members of the press. He was later killed, along with 4 other Americans, including Don Harris and Robert Brown of NBC News. After the killings, the Guyanese authorities impounded the first tapes and notes made by the NBC crew.
I appeared in Washington in February before the International Relations Committee and made some statements and some charges and documentation which resulted in the Foreign Affairs Committee, or International Relations Committee, which they call it today. They voted to ask the House Select Committee on Intelligence to investigate my charges. And they are currently investigating those charges by the House Select Committee on Intelligence.
Can you tell us what the charges are?
Well, the charges basically amounted to CIA contact with both the Burnham government there and with the People's Temple. That originally, it was my belief at the time I went to Washington that the purpose of our involvement there was to support the government of Burnham for commercial reasons, and they used the People's Temple almost as enforcers to help support an unpopular government there to keep control of the government of Guyana. We knew that there had been an article in the San Mateo Times in December of '79 which indicated that the Deputy Chief of Mission there, Richard Dwyer, was in fact the CIA station chief. And he was the one that went to Jonestown with Leo's party, and he claimed to be slightly wounded, but there was a tape made at the time of the murders and suicides there with Jones yelling, "Get Dwyer out of here, get Dwyer out of here." And the indications are that it was Dwyer who went back into Jonestown after Leo was murdered and was there at the time. And there's great question as just who shot Jim Jones and why, whether Jones was shot to shut him up. The question also as to how all these people died and just when they died, which is all documented here. But soon I came back from Washington, because of my testimony, I started getting documentation from a Berkeley psychologist called the Penal Colony here, and from the Alliance for Preservation of Religious Liberty in Washington, which indicated other things, one of which was that George Philip Blakey was a top Jones aide, and he was the man who arranged the purchase or the lease of the land in Guyana, provided the money and arranged the lease down there in 1974. He also is tracked now as being a CIA operative in Angola in 1975 with UNITA. He's also the same guy who was the top aide who arranged all this purchase and the finances, is also the husband of Deborah Layton Blakey, who fled Jonestown and made those charges. He's a brother-in-law of Larry Layton, who was acquitted yesterday. And it's interesting to note the Peninsula Times Tribune says yesterday the jury appeared, in acquitting Layton, the jury appeared to have agreed with the defense contention that Layton was brainwashed and drugged at the time of the shootings, could not be held criminally responsible. But the gist of what I'm getting to is this. I've received a lot of documentation, which I will allow you to hear today, that indicates the strong possibility that Jonestown and the People's Temple was in reality a mass mind control experiment conducted by the CIA as a follow-up to something called MK Ultra, which they conducted from the early 50s through 1974. They used to use the VA hospital and state hospitals. They used the federal and state penitentiaries for their experiments.
Do you think that Jim Jones was actively involved with the CIA?
I do now.
Do you have any conclusions as to how the people died in Jonestown?
Yes, I have part of our documentation here is a report from which is attached here. The chief medical examiner in Guyana is a Dr. Leslie Moto. He reported, and this is attached here, his opinion that more than 700 of those bodies found at Jonestown were not suicide victims but were murdered. He based this on the injection marks in the upper arm. Page 4 of my statement here.
By injection, like that?
Yes, and by gunfire. there were a lot more people killed by gunfire than they've ever admitted so far. We had heard reports that there were 50 of them, approximately 50 men with guns ringing around there, so people couldn't get out, and very few of them did get out. So it's according to the chief medical officer in Guyana, most of the people down there were murdered rather than suicide.
Who is suppressing all of this? Are you implying the CIA was active in the suppression?
Yes, I'm suggesting to you that a lot of things that don't make sense here. I'm suggesting that the long delay in anyone getting in, or the press getting in there, or very many people all getting in there for several days, was caused by a deliberate attempt to manufacture the story, which has now been accepted and sold successfully to the American people.
And what is that story that you think the people are falsely accepting?
That, in effect, this was a large group of disillusioned or disoriented black people who went down to Guyana and who turned their backs on this country and committed suicide, and we might as well we're get rid of them, and that's just an aberration type of thing. I think that's the story that's been peddled. When you see the documentation here, you'll begin to wonder yourselves why the first reports were 350 people died or 400 people died, and for several days that was reported, and then they started finding more bodies. When the first reports were that 500 fled in the jungle, the people examined the bodies the first time and counted them by name, by types of people, men, women, and children, turned them over. Then a few days later, they claimed to have found 2 and 3 stacks of bodies underneath those. You know, it boggles the mind, the stories that were passed out, but they apparently have gotten away with, I think, with one of the greatest fabrications of recent years.
What significance do you attach to the fact that the leadership of the temple was largely white and the membership of the temple was largely black?
I mentioned that in here. I think that that's part and parcel of the whole thing. I think that this is what caused me very suspicious about this whole experiment, about the possibilities here. The cadre was all white, and yet we think of Jonestown as a bunch of black people who were committed suicide without mentioning that white cadre, and that doesn't quite add up. I think there are racist overtones to the whole thing.
What kind of racist overtones? What are you exactly alleging?
I'm alleging that the media picture that was printed, that was painted rather, and then came out in print and so on, was that you don't have to worry about these people because they're crazy, they'll do anything, and they're not like us. It's my impression at this time that they were conducting some sort of mind control experiments. For example, they had a very modern hospital down there which they bragged about. So modern that in that population they had medical checkups for everyone every day. But there's no need for that unless you're conducting experiments where you're having control groups and you're giving people, and they gave them their vitamins every day. And it's my guess that they were just using them as guinea pigs to see what they could do under isolated circumstances. They'd take them off into a jungle someplace far away from everybody. They get them there somehow, and then they're able to see how these various drugs work on different groups.
Could you tell us about the details of the murders in Guyana, exactly how they were killed, please?
Well, Dr. Mutu, the pathologist at the site in Jonestown, said that 70 to 80% of the bodies had a fresh needle mark in the back of the left shoulder blade at a point they could not have reached themselves, and that the body showed evidence of having been forced to take the shots. And the official coroner's verdict from Matthews Ridge by the Guyanese judge and jury that looked into the situation was that all the people had been murdered, that not one had been a suicide. Mutu found evidence of gunshot wounds and strangulation in many of the other bodies. I studied about 150 pictures in which I could see gunshot wounds. There's no way that cyanide pathology explains the condition of those bodies all face down, and you could see drag marks, and the body count went up because the area was surrounded by 350 Guyanese troops, about 200 British Black Watch troops, which are the equivalent of their Green Beret on maneuvers at Matthews Ridge in those days, and American Green Berets that came in with the body cleanup teams that spent the period of the 5 days murdering people, rounding them up in the jungle. The original reports were all 408 dead, and then 700 flee into the woods. And the military said, first, the Guyanese can't count. Second, that it was bodies on top of bodies, though how you start with 408 and end up with 915 and say that the 400 covered the 500 makes no sense. They said bodies in little piles. They even said at the end, after they'd been there for 6 days, that they forgot to go around to the back of the pavilion and there were 500 bodies back there. I mean, this was the final official explanation, but these people were being killed, yes, smaller in this room. I don't know where all the survivors are. Many of them survived because they cooperated with the plan and were meant to survive. That's the case with the basketball team and other people.
They were off somewhere.
Well, they eventually got to Georgetown and eventually came back to the United States. Some of them were out on a ship. The ones that were on the boat with Blakey went to Trinidad. Then they went to Panama and emptied a $5 million bank account in Credit Suisse. And then they went to Grenada. They set up shop in Grenada, I believe in the mental hospital there, with Dr. Bourne and his father, who worked in primate research with MKUltra. And Bourne set up all the methadone programs in the United States for the Rockefellers. And I think they were experimenting on the mental patients because that's the only building bombed in the invasion of Grenada. And there's 180 people in the inmates in the psychiatric institution murdered, dumped into a mass grave, and then the U.S. was going to send $400 million to rebuild the hospital. And, they were going to make it a better unit to experiment on people after they got the right government in.
Early on, the cocaine smuggling operation, because I believe...
There were drugs and guns being smuggled in and out, and there were relations of mercenaries. Some of these killers that were taken in and out of Angola, the CIA-backed UNITA forces by Blakey, Iran mercenaries, and they did run guns and drugs, but the operation was primarily an extension of MKUltra. People were taken off the streets here in San Francisco, out of the welfare rolls, from the elderly homes, from the psychiatric institutions, from the prisons. Children were given as wards of the court and turned over into their control. They put them in buses. They took them to Miami, and I talked to an air traffic controller when they landed in Guyana. All of the blacks were bound and gagged coming off of the plane. People 5 miles away didn't even know there were blacks at Jonestown. All they had ever seen of People's Temple were the white crew that was running it, going in and out of the cities. They were buying Guyanese babies from women wherever they could give a blanket or something for a baby and taking them back in there. And there was massive experimentation. There were enough drugs on site to drug the population of Georgetown, Guyana, over 120,000 for more than a year for a population of 1,200 people in this camp. And Dr. Schacht, who I believe survived, he's not in the first death list. He's added to the second. I think he's related to Hjalmar Schacht, the Mike Reich's Minister of Finance, who developed the phrase "Arbeit macht frei," work makes you free at the Auschwitz camp. And they came to Houston. That's where the Schacht family ended up. They were the big bankers for Hitler. And this guy is from Houston, and he was not a doctor. He was described as doing, suturing on wounds without anesthesia and all kind of sadistic things. And they had medical tags. You can see even in Time magazine medical tags on the people. But an order came down from Zbigniew Brzezinski through Haig to Robert Pastor on site to strip bodies of all identification and tags. Then the bodies are left in the sun to rot so that no fingerprints, no identification can be done from the tags, and no autopsy can be done, fluid or otherwise, by the time they get back to the United States. So you can never find out what killed them or how many drugs they had in the body. They had one footlocker there with 11,000 doses of Thorazine. And the drugs that are described are the exact drugs that were used for 30 years in MKUltra in the different control scenarios.